Amidst the harsh climate and its remote regions separated from the rest of the country, Phoenix had to overcome many challenges to become one of the most successful cities. This was done by agricultural and technological advancement that helped domesticate the land to create a livable society. Unlike other Western cities, this was done with an initial agricultural phase that commenced the city's wealth. However, at the turn of the 20th century, Anglo political leaders and boosters used the vast environment and a minority labor force to attract industries from the east, which eventually developed into the metropolis that the city is today. The Arizona population consisted of European immigrants, Civil War veterans, former miners, Mexican nationals, and immigrants from Sonora. Anglos first came for minerals, establishing mining in Arizona in 1863. Mexicans made up a great amount of the population. Mexicans converted to citizenship to the United States as a result of U.S. land acquisitions. Immigrants sought the economic opportunities Phoenix promised. Members of the working class and minority families began to increasingly populate the southern sections of Phoenix, south of the railroad. Lower economic class families tended to live at the outskirts of the city limits, where land was cheaper. Mexican settlers also moved into the local agricultural economy, which would become a major source of work for Hispanics and a major part of their contribution to the growth of Phoenix. The formation of the Mexican community would not have been complete without a church, with early residents attended Catholic services when they could. In 1865, the United States Army established Camp McDowell to protect the residents of Prescott, Wickenburg, and other central Arizona areas from hostile Indians. Upon the establishment of the Army camp, there became a need for more food and water for the residences. In 1867, Mexican Americans helped former soldier John Smith to harvest hay along the Salt River for the Army camp. John Smith was one of the first settlers to live on the land and helped establish Phoenix as a city. That same year, one of Phoenix's founders, John William Swilling, also known as Jack Swilling, worked with Anglos and Mexicans in clearing the Hohokam Indian canals. They dug new ones and planted crops for nearby military posts and mining camps. Like the proverbial phoenix, the city rose from the ashes of the Hohokam civilization into a prospering American city and was officially recognized by the government on May 4, 1868. Jack Swilling established the Swilling Irrigation Canal Company on June 15, 1868. Having observed various tribes practicing irrigated farming since living in the area, Swilling utilized the abandoned ruins of the Hohokam settlements that integrated various canal systems. It was a relatively easy job, considering the Hohokam had built up to 1,000 miles of canal that extended 30 miles, with the largest being 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep. Swilling and his men diverted the water from Salt River and founded a small colony 4 miles east of present-day Phoenix. By 1870, Phoenix had 270 residents, 124 were Mexican. Unlike Spanish frontier towns in California or Florida, Phoenix appeared Midwestern in its physical forms. Even though Mexican Americans constituted nearly half of the residents in 1870, and several indigenous tribes lived in close proximity to Phoenix, evidence of these non-Anglo cultures was relatively absent from the city streets, institutions, and landscapes. As more people continued to arrive to the city, the people of Phoenix sought to hold a meeting to select the official town site in 1870 at John Moore's home, a well-known farmer in the area. He offered 40 acres of his own land to add to the total 320 acres that was purchased for $550 to ultimately create the official town site of Phoenix. Then Captain William Augustus Hancock of Fort McDowell made the first survey of the site with east-west streets named after presidents, with Washington Street as the main street, and north-south streets named after local Indians. The Indian street names, however, were eventually changed to numbers to make it easier to recognize. The most popular amusements, but also the most disruptive, were various activities like musical and theater shows, billiards, gambling, and prostitution, which were all connected with the town's saloons. In 1875, there were 16 saloons, 4 dance halls, and 3 gambling sites. In 1886, the Phoenix Opera House opened and allegedly contained 800 seats. Besides housing entertainment, it filled a vital need for public space and was also used for social club meetings, Catholic bazaars, school programs, and other various public meetings. Public amusements continued to develop, especially by the 1890s, with outdoor roller rinks, a merry-go-round, and the Phoenix Park, which offered a community swimming pool. The city was growing, but the townsite commissioner form of government wasn't working as the people had hoped. On October 25, 1875, the Phoenicians held an election to select 3 village trustees, with John Smith as chairman of the trustees, Charles W. Stearns as treasurer, and Captain Hancock as secretary. As this oasis city began to develop, it became more attracted to Anglo boosters. Anglos had already established wealth, influence, and prestige. They wanted to acquire more power, and they used Mexicans as an underclass to help them reach this goal. Because Anglos had such a dominant position, they dictated the ethnic arrangement, leaving the majority of Mexican Americans to live in bad areas. They used minorities to build the city, but once Anglo goals were reached, discrimination rose at an alarming rate. The city saw its first wave of Chinese immigrants working for laundry facilities, grocery stores, and restaurant establishments, as well as hard labor in railways and canals. In addition, between 1870 and 1880, the Mexican population made up half of the total population. The Anglo-Phoenicians treated the individual minority groups differently, but they felt that all minorities pose a cultural and economic threat to the success for the city, further enforcing the goal of becoming an Anglo-American city by pushing the minorities into the southern poor neighborhoods. Phoenician boosterism, or the community self-promotion based on optimism and false claims, was at an all-time high when the Desert Land Act was passed on March 3, 1877. The Desert Land Act allowed homesteaders to apply for 640 acres of land for reclamation. But without proper regulations, it became an open invitation to systemize land fraud in the West. Despite countless fraudulent activities, the bill helped the city to continue its growth. By 1879, Phoenix saw a building boom when a factory was created to make fired brick. Brick quickly became the preferred material for homes, businesses, and public buildings. Over the next several decades, the common Victorian-style homes were built, which replaced the inexpensive adobe that the Hohokam used, shedding the old Western rough frontier appearance. The downtown architecture adopted the new European styles after the ban of adobe homes in the Great Flood after the 1880s. By the end of 1880, 2,458 people lived in Phoenix and had cultivated 10,000 acres of land. A school with 379 pupils was built, ice factory established, and a new brick sidewalk was laid in front of Tiger Saloon. In addition, a number of privately owned canal companies also formed, providing additional land with water. To counter the number of floods, W.J. Murphy, along with the business elite and some farmers, had begun discussing the need to construct a dam to control the flood of water throughout the seasons between 1870 and 1880. He was awarded the contract to build the Arizona Canal, which instigated the creation of the First National Bank, the first bank based in Arizona in 1880. As Phoenix continued to rise above the ashes, its people stressed the presence of businesses, professionals, tradespeople, and prosperous farmers. It fed their impulse to become a cultured, liberal, and progressive city by creating additional schools, churches, and societies. Phoenicians sought after additional population, with connections from other cities, by promoting tourism and emphasizing the healthfulness of the climate as well as the beauty of the scenery that suited souls. Boosterism attracted those diagnosed with tuberculosis. Searching for a climactic cure, the Phoenix dry heat was promised to be a cure for those diagnosed with tuberculosis. Over 7,000 people hopelessly ill with tuberculosis were sent annually to the West and Southwest, and that over 60% of these persons had no significant means to provide for the necessities of life. As a result of this, they died from lack of care or were a burden. General Moses Sherman graduated from a school in New York in 1873 and came to Prescott, Arizona on a teaching assignment. By 1880, Sherman became the first superintendent of public instruction in Arizona. In 1884 and 1885, he had become the dominant force behind the Phoenix Railway that connected Phoenix and Glendale in the north, where it linked to the Santa Fe Railroad, which was the nearest means of railway up until 1885. Along with marrying the daughter of one of the builders of the Central Pacific Railway, Sherman had brought about the transportation boom in Phoenix in the late 19th century. He owned the first public transportation system in the valley, which were streetcars that were pulled by mules. Prior to the streetcars like the ones that San Francisco established, Phoenicians traveled by wagons and horses. The creations of the streetcars and the railway had made Phoenix very accessible not only within the state, but also from other states. This again brought in more business to the blooming oasis in the desert. This quickly led to the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce refocusing its tourism once again. W. J. Murphy had built Ingleside, the first large resort in the 1890s, to welcome this new growth. At this time, farmers also sought to profit from the change by growing various fruits such as apricots, peaches, and most importantly, citrus. Citrus had become very successful, and within 5 years, roughly 150,000 trees had been planted near the Arizona Canal. While men sought after the expansion of the city, the women actively built communal establishments to better the livelihood of the growing city. Not only did these proactive women help build schools and churches, they became a key social network and a means of integrating new arrivals into Phoenix very quickly. Teaching was one of the generally accepted occupations for women, with home economics being one of the main subjects. In 1890, Ladies' Benevolent Society was organized, providing relief to the poor and sick, and even went as far as to investigate the treatment of these people in hospitals. The women of the city joined in the effort and sometimes led the way. The goal of the Phoenix Women's Club during 1913 was the stimulation of culture in the capital city. In 1891, the Phoenix Indian School was built. The school was designed to civilize the Indians in Anglo-American ways. Anglos felt like the schools on the reservation were too close to tribal homes and weren't doing this. The doors of the school opened in September 1891, and in June of 1892, female students were allowed to enroll, but the first graduation exercises did not start until 1901, 10 years after the school opened. The Phoenix Indian School was given a $100,000 federal grant, which was the reason that a group of Phoenix citizens played a major role in the building of the school. They were more interested in the money than the schooling of the Native Americans. Between 1890 and 1913, separate elementary schools were built for white and black students, and Phoenix high schools had a separate area for African American students. All of this separation in schooling resulted in Phoenix essentially having 3 different school systems: one for white students, one for black students, and one for red or Native American students. Oddly enough, Mexican American students went to the white schools. As with the federal loan grant for the Phoenix Indian School, business elites in Phoenix were only focused on gaining more control, money, and power. They wanted the direction of the city to stay focused on their idea of a civilized white American city. In October 1913, they voted to ratify a new chapter that changed the city from a council-manager form of government into a commission city-manager form of administration. The utilization of this structural reform was widespread in the smaller cities of the United States by World War I. Though at a slow but steady rate, Phoenix continued to grow primarily because of agriculture. The amount of land in production had fallen by a fifth from 1895 to 1905 during the drought, but the return of rain brought these numbers back to their former level by 1908. After the completion of the Roosevelt Dam, which began construction in 1906, the quality of cultivated land increased dramatically, rising by a third from 1910 to 1920, and later raising again another third during the 1920s. The earliest farmers grew alfalfa, which remained the dominant crop until later replaced by cotton. The agricultural prosperity of the Salt River Valley fueled investments and land speculation by businessmen from the east. The Phoenicians sought after investments other than agriculture, such as mining, but knew that the future of Phoenix relied heavily dependent on farming, which limited how fast the town could grow in the coming years. Expanding acreage created more opportunities, and the number of farmers more than doubled, from 2,130 in 1910 to 4,359 in 1921. This growth was encouraged by publicity campaigns operated by the Board of Trade, the Santa Fe Railroad, and the U.S. Reclamation Service. Minority population remained low throughout these years, which was a reflection of the deliberate effort of Phoenician boosters to define a preferred culture and people. Anglos felt that all minorities posed cultural and economic problems. The cotton market attempted to replace the alfalfa market in 1920, but failed due to drought and overfarming. This caused a short-lived depression. Growers went bankrupt and many businesses in general declined. Mexican farm workers, who had since been exploited, became destitute and their situation became increasingly worse. By 1930, Phoenix could be called a significant regional urban center where the population rose from 29,053 in 1920 to 48,112 in 1930. And the metropolis of Arizona remains the largest city in the Southwest between El Paso and Los Angeles. There were 120 miles of sidewalks, 161 miles of street, 51,000 books in the public library, 70 men in the police department, a new pipeline created with 48 inches of concrete that is still operational today, and a budget of $2 million. Needless to say, this town was on its way. Although Phoenix was a desert valley that was overlooked for many years, it wasn't long before it began to develop into a metropolis city. Agriculture is booming. More people are coming. By the end of the 1920s, promoters felt justified in calling Phoenix truly the capital of Arizona, the hub of new developments, the storehouse and supply house of the state. As Phoenix goes, so does Arizona.